weather? My goodness. Thank you all for making it out. Before we begin the speeches, I want to take a moment to recognize and address our speakers this evening. At our most recent quiz bowl, one of the MCI then and now questions inquired after the meaning of MCI's motto, Certum Pete Fino. When the answer aimed for a sure end was revealed, an audience member shouted out, "Well, that is morbid." Humor aside, I found myself looking at the Latin phrase around the lamp on our seal. The lamp is an often used symbol for knowledge and wisdom, but the quote's meaning is somewhat more obscure, as our audience participant noted. In a way, tonight is the end. It's the end of the Manson Essay process. Each of you has spent hours researching, writing, editing, revising, rehearsing, and more to meet the graduation requirement. Tonight is also a celebration of those efforts and a recognition of that hard work. In other ways, this is the beginning of another end. You have completed a graduation requirement. Tonight is the first of many ceremonies recognizing these achievements. Next will be undergraduate awards night, the senior, I'm just forgetting something, that's okay, I'll be the first one to do it. The senior project presentations, the showcase, senior chapel commencement, and then soon you'll be seniors looking at your own graduation at the end of your time with MCI. The other evening, I had the pleasure of speaking with 4 Manson Essay finalists: Norbert Young, 1966, Tanya Carnrick, 73, Deborah Kronovo, 85, and Thomas Bertrand, 1990. Each of them remembered their Manson Essay topic. Many years later, and the memory was still there. While the phrase has a great verb, aim, and a clear noun end, it's that adjective that I want to highlight tonight. When sure functions as an adjective, it means confident in what one thinks or knows, having no doubt that one is right. I think that is an incredibly appropriate adjective for this evening. Tonight, each of you speakers will engage in the heroic act of sharing your truth. You'll publicly profess something you believe with confidence in your knowledge and thinking, and you have worked so hard to know you are right, and that is what we are celebrating this evening. Congratulations on this momentous occasion. I hope you will hold on to these memories and lessons. Congratulations on this sure end. At this point, I think we're going to ask you to silence your cell phones, and then, Jake, do you have something you want to say? Good, okay. And we will invite Elena Rowe, last year's Manson Essayist, to come up and MC. So warm welcome.
Now I would like to invite Elisa Erdry to the stage. We'll be speaking about promote patient protection through medical devices regulation. Elisa proposes that medical devices can be safer through an examination of the Federal Drug Administration's process and efforts to emulate international models.
There's that delightful noise when it just gets put down in the short. I will prevent disease whenever I can, for prevention is preferable to cure. The modern Hippocratic Oath. When medical professionals swear to uphold the Hippocratic Oath, it includes the prevention of harm. The FDA must protect public health and safety of patients by effectively regulating medical devices. Instead, the current system enables widespread patient harm through lack of strict requirements, reporting, health professional education, and pre-market review. All of these problems could be prevented by taking precautions. Other countries protect their citizens more effectively, yet the FDA refuses to address the problem itself. The breathtaking weakness of the FDA's rules regarding medical device regulation are at the root of medical device patient harm. For this reason, the FDA must address the lack of oversight over the majority of medical devices by reforming the process for the review of medical devices, including following Japan's lead by dividing the Food and Drug Administration into multiple branches, addressing the lack of education concerning medical device reporting, and a more thorough initial screening process. The FDA oversees the medical device industry in the United States. They classify and review medical devices. This is crucial to ensuring patient safety. Medical devices are medical equipment that are used to diagnose, treat, and prevent disease, says Judith Johnson, specialist in biomedical policy, in her congressional report from 2016. The classifications of medical devices range from low risk to high risk. Class 1 devices being the lowest risk. This includes anything from band-aids to scalpels. Class 3 devices are a little bit more complicated. This includes implants and other internal and external medical devices. Class 3 medical devices make up about 50% of the equipment on the medical device market. This means somebody you know could have one of these implants. You'd think that having different risk-based assessments, the devices would be regulated differently. However, Class 2 and 3 devices are regulated very similarly for post and pre-market review. This is a problem in the United States market system. Japan boasts a stronger regulatory system. They have two bodies, one to regulate the pre-market review. This is the Pharmaceutical and Medical Device Agency, the PMDA, and one to regulate the post-market review, the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare, the MHLW. US doesn't have this post-market review. They don't have a formal process for review after the device has been on the market, which leaves devices under-regulated without proper attention. A post-review system that doesn't effectively regulate high-risk devices should be cause for reform. One of these failures of both post-market and pre-market review is the medal on medical hip replacements. The medal on medical hip replacements went through the 510(k) process. This means that they were allowed to be on the market as long as they showed that they were substantially equivalent to one already on the market. They were compared to ones from the late 1970s and 80s. Because the device companies did not know what these devices would do, they ground against each other, releasing medical particles into the area surrounding the implant. This left patients without an implant and with a bonus infection. There was a 68% complication rate. The FDA was forced to reclassify the devices, and it was forced to go through the PMA, the pre-market approval system. This is a failure from both the pre-market and the post-market review because it was not caught by the FDA. It was caught by reporting. The 510K pathway is a dangerous loophole to the pre-market approval pathway, which requires clinical trials, 2 human trials, and an application. Similar to metal on medical hip replacements, orthopedic devices that went through the 510K pathway were 11.5 times more likely to be recalled than those that went through the pre-market approval pathway. This is dangerous to patient safety, and this harm could have been prevented, but it's perpetuated by medical device companies because they seek the more cost-effective route, the 510K pathway. However, to avoid claiming its cost outright, they claim that the regulation stifles innovation. However, the Porter hypothesis disproves this claim. The Porter hypothesis says that good regulation stimulates innovation because of change in challenges and there's less competition. Competition, skill, and investment activities all influence innovation. There are environmental changes. It is medical device companies' blatant disregard which causes a disruption in the safe and effective regulation of devices, using the 510K pathway as a loophole around the PMA requirements. These companies continue because under-regulation is enabled by lack of reporting. There's a lack of information, a fear of punishment, and uncertainty about what and how devices should be reported. Medical professionals that were asked about if they knew how to report a device, on average, there's 41% of medical professionals who did not know how to report a device, or even the system that was implemented in their hospital. The FDA perpetuates this by under-reporting malfunctions on the MOD, their database for medical devices. If no doctors or the FDA database give patients proper information, they are left in the dark about their choices. The MLM replacements are an example of where reporting can affect lives. It can save lives. It can prevent what happened to 68% of the people who received the implant. Without this proper communication and information to patients from the FDA and their surgeons, patients cannot make informed decisions. There is a solution, however. The FDA receives user fees when device companies submit an application. They could use these user fees to create a required course for surgeons and medical professionals to have to go through. This course would show how they can evaluate the risk of these devices and communicate this to patients. All of this harm has arisen from the loose FDA regulations and lack of initial thorough screening process, which is why our reform must be set in motion. The United States has a different post-review system from the rest of the world, which is the reason why it is ineffective. The larger parts of the world utilize the split governing body, one for pre-market approval and one for post-market approval. This is especially evident in Japan, which boasts a stronger system than the United States. The FDA could use this as a platform for reform. The Japanese system has 2 bodies, which creates a check and balance system. The FDA has many responsibilities where post-evaluation does not come top on their list of priorities. Creating 2 different bodies would also balance the responsibilities and make a more effective regulatory system. The new system would allow more time for effective regulation and fixing the problems and dangers of the under-regulated devices currently on the market. With more time, the FDA could follow similar strategies that proved beneficial for Japan. This process requires diligence and time, however, which is possible if the FDA utilized a 2-body system and split the medical device branches into two. Such time and resources would benefit surgeon and patient safety as well. The FDA needs to establish a prerequisite course for all surgeons, which educates them on the risks of medical devices, as well as how to communicate these devices, these malfunctions, right? Patients and surgeons need to be able to communicate. Patients and surgeons need to make informed, succinct decisions with sufficient data, which would lower the rate of possible malfunctions. Education also benefits reports. The quality of devices would benefit, when a person is knowledgeable and comfortable with filing a report, the quality of devices will benefit from this data. Both medical device companies and the public benefits. This revision of the FDA's medical device regulatory system is crucial to human health. Thank you.
Now, I would like to invite Kyle Hall to the stage, who will be talking about mental health in sports. Kyle explores current professional athletes' advocacy for mental health in an arena that has been neglected.
Mental health is something that is often overlooked in the world of sports, especially professional. From the minor leagues to the Olympics, it is viewed as something not worth talking about. But according to the Athletes for Hope Foundation, 35% of all elite athletes suffer from a mental illness themselves. Although sports can be a beneficial emotional outlet for athletes in some cases, that is just not the case. For example, athletes such as Michael Phelps, Naomi Osaka, and Simone Biles, who are all athletes that perform at the highest level of their respective sport, suffer from a mental illness themselves. Which is why the demands on professional athletes can be extremely overwhelming, causing more detrimental than beneficial impact on the athlete's mental health. Within the different types of disorders, the most common include depression and anxiety, which generally coincide with each other. All it takes is one injury, trade, or even just add pressure of the fans to go in a bad place mentally. Now I'm going to go into some problems and solutions for athletes who have been through this kind of mental disorders. First up is one of the darker ones, is by the name of Hayden Hurst. Hayden Hurst was drafted into the Pittsburgh Pirates organization as a pitcher, where his prowess was plagued by the yips. The yips are a performance-based anxiety disorder, which causes an athlete to miss a putt or an easy layup or something like that. No physical disorder, just a mental mistake. Hurst became severely depressed after his pitching performance went downhill. He couldn't pitch a strike. Just couldn't hit the strike zone or throw good pitches at all. So he eventually attempted suicide, and then after a failed attempt, he woke up covered in blood and thought to himself, what am I doing with my life? So after that, he received psychiatric help every week, switched to football, and eventually became a first-round draft pick. After being drafted, he founded the Hayden Hurst Foundation to implement mental health programs in schools. While he was visiting a school, a kid actually came up to him crying and said, you really changed my life. And it was after his dad had failed in a suicide attempt as well after his dad had passed away. Hayden Hurst ended up raising about $45,000 his first week and became the NFL Player Association MVP for that week. Also, that shows how communication really can go a long way. Talking to a therapist or just your peers in general. For example, Michael Phelps, probably the most decorated Olympian athlete of all time, used a therapist and talked to his family and wife whenever he felt that his mental health was going down a dark path. Another athlete is Simone Biles, who felt the weight of the world on her shoulders and opted out of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. She stated, "We have to protect our mind and our body rather than do what the world wants us to do." In the same situation, Naomi Osaka, who is one of the best up-and-coming tennis stars, she had a similar situation when she withdrew from the French Open. After skipping a press conference, she was fined $15,000 and had this to say, My number one suggestion for the tennis hierarchy was to allow a small number of mental health or sick days to refuel and regenerate your physical and mental well-being. Another athlete, to wrap it up, is Andrew Luck. He was a 29-year-old quarterback who retired at the peak of his career. He had like 11 different injuries and just couldn't do it anymore. And because of the pressure from the fans, and when he realized that the off seasons sucked up his time to spend with his family, instead of spending time with his family, he would rehab and not be able to see him. So at 29, he decided to retire. And to wrap it up, we see how mental health is often overlooked in the world of sports. So now it is up to the higher-ups of the sports industries to find a way to keep the athletes' well-being afloat. Whether that be implementing new ideas such as mental health days or easy access to therapists, or just breaking the stigma in general, that is very important in order to keep the younger athletes of this generation thriving.
Now, I would like to invite Clark Osaka to the stage, who will be speaking about human development models and advancement. Clark asserts that human development requires a reconsideration of roles of democracy and authoritarianism in progress.
On February 1st, 2021, Myanmar, a democratic country, was overthrown by its very own military coup, and an authoritarian leader was placed into power. Myanmar's democratic legacy was wiped out in just a matter of a few days, and has prompted a long-lasting underlying debate over which model, democracy or authoritarianism, is better for human development. In my opinion, however, I believe neither of the models are better or more contributory to human development. Democracy is often wrongly perceived as being the most crucial factor in the success of human development, while authoritarianism the opposite, while in fact a blend of both is required for humanity to thrive with the most efficient model going forward. To understand why, let us examine each model closely, starting with the democratic model. Democracy, as we all are familiar with, is the system in which the people are actively involved in the process of governing, policy making, and sometimes decision makings. I would argue, however, that it is generally perceived as a better model due to its more availability of freedom. I would argue, however, that it is not due to the fundamental flaw that seems to usually occurs in this type of model. One of these flaws being incompetent people being involved in the crucial decision-making processes. Because this model emphasizes heavily on the people being involved having a say on a matter, this often leads to unskilled people deciding on a matter they know little to none about. And this contributes badly to human development, as oftenly the decisions made by these people usually have far-reaching effects. Take Brexit, a referendum held by the United Kingdom to consider its then membership of the EU, which resulted in it leaving the Union, for example. The result of Brexit had prompted an exodus of immigrant workers and had left many different sectors of the UK economy to be in bloom for a short period of time, according to Sanford Euronews. In June of 2020 alone, 14,000 immigrants had left the country and only 600 of them had ever came back. Because the economy of UK relied heavily upon immigrant workers, this had disrupted the economic growth of the UK and had left it regressing for a short period of time. Despite this fundamental flaw, however, it would be wrong to say that the democratic model does not contribute at all to human development. To its credit, the democratic model contributes to human development by creating an autonomous system for human development to happen on its own with little to none initiative from government and authorities. This is due, of course, to the model structure of allowing for people to be more involved and advocate for themselves. An example of this can be seen in Palo Alto, California, where the city's government had made plans to basically build apartment complexes in the area, but the plan was overturned by the residents who did not like this idea. As illustrated in this demonstration, the people were able to oppose the government when it came to policies that could disrupt their livelihood and successfully defeated it. This is what democracy can do. Now that one of the models has been explored, let us take a look at authoritarianism, the model in which the people submit to authorities. Despite being viewed by many as the inferior model due to its obstruction of human rights, this model contributes greatly to the advancement of human development, possibly as much, if not more, than the democratic model does. This is because in this model, authorities are able to push forward plans quickly, with little hindrances, and implement changes and reforms swiftly. An example of this is China's economic reform, which through a series of swift economic policies, like creating a spatial coastal economic zones, successfully lifted the lives of hundreds of millions of people from poverty, creating a huge advancement in human society in the East. Despite this success, however, this model is of course not rid of fundamentally profound problems. In this model, leaders often stay in power for a long period of time due to the structure of the model itself allowing for such power to exist. When this happens, actually, as usually is the case, the people will eventually become displeased with the leaders. Take a look at Belarus or the Taiwanese opposing the Chinese government, or the Russians growing increasingly displeased with Putin, for example. When this happens, criticism is sure to arise, and this leads to obstruction of press or freedom of speech, as the authorities will, of course, try to stabilize their administrations by silencing those who will speak out against them. This contributes negatively to human development in that it hinders progress, as it allows for bad governments to stay in power, but also because it restricts one of the most fundamental human rights out there, the freedom to speech. Now, because both models are so fundamentally broken, a new model has to
The number of sexualized scenes per single hour of television can rival the percentage of LGBT characters in all of our televised media. One must ask themselves, how is this okay? The answer is that it's not. Our television prioritizes sexualized content over representation of people, especially LGBTQIA individuals. When they over-display these discrepancies, these imbalances, and these inaccuracies, it's very dangerous, and this is why. We often see everywhere something related to sex. Every time we turn around, we see something. So much so that a study from the TAB found this. In some recent shows, so much as 4 sex scenes per 1 single hour of television are in shows. With the over-display of sexualized media, we often find a, quote, easy version of sex. A sexologist named Dr. Gonzalez speaks on this and states how it's not truly what it is. That it creates a unrealistic expectation of what one may want to find within a relationship, and can create tension between partners and have them find difficulty finding a middle ground or a place where both feel happy and satisfied. To put into perspective how much television affects what we believe, a 2002 study done on students aged 18 to 22 found a near linear correlation with the time spent viewing a certain sexual or relationship or gender stereotype with how deeply someone believed that. Even with the prior knowledge control, they were able to guess with almost 100% accuracy what these people would believe after given a certain type of media to watch. Not only did it find stereotypes within just sexualized content, but it also found stereotypes within behavior, gender roles, and other biases among people. Not only can it make people believe what they see, but it can also often encourage them to replicate them. A study called adolescent sexuality in the media points out that television can have an effect on what students believe, but also what people in general will behave like. They argue that because of the over-sexualization of our media, children and teenagers are rushing into sex, creating unsafe sexual practice that often brings forth more STIs and more teenage pregnancy. Underage sexual activity. This is worsened because oftentimes television scripts characters who are under the legal age of consent in sexualized media. This is often called under different forms of rape laws in different states, especially in the United States. And sexual assault should not be something that our television should advise, should not represent in any favorable manner, let alone overrepresenting. Oftentimes, the overrepresentation of assault scenes, rape, sexual assault, sexual abuse, and things like that can create a stereotype of what that looks like, and more importantly, what a victim looks like. They often paint the victims in one negative light, creating a character who is the cold, dark, aggressive one, and that is how they deal with their trauma. There are many, many, many ways of handling something, and everyone handles things differently. The problem with creating one type of representation, one story, one path, is that it becomes hard to recognize others. It becomes hard for victims themselves to find validation in their feelings because they aren't behaving like the person they're seeing. They aren't what they're seeing, so clearly they aren't valid. And even if people don't think these things, it can change what other people think of these people. If you don't behave a certain way, maybe you're lying, maybe something didn't happen to you, maybe, who knows? The problem with creating one story is that it doesn't define everybody. Shows often have characters who perpetuate sexual assault. For example, Game of Thrones, with a total of 50 sexual assault scenes within this series. There are characters within shows whose entire redemption arc is based around the abuse, especially sexual abuse of other people. They start at the lowest of the low with the introduction of their character, and slowly throughout the series they become one of the most beloved characters. There are ways from going from a hated or less than character to a beloved character without having a background of assault, of sexual abuse, of murder. Authors often use sex to explore a character's sexuality and make them a more well-rounded character. But I argue that there are ways to create more well-rounded characters without using sex, without overusing sex. And there are ways to explore a character's sexuality without making sex the main point of their personality. For example, a show called The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt displays a gay black man as one of the main characters. His sexuality is prevalent in his character, but it is not who he is. It is a fact as a part of him. And there is a lighthearted humor throughout the show with that. There is a recognition of that. But they don't over-sexualize it. Unfortunately, there are so few poly-LGBT representations within shows such as that one often struggles to find themselves in television if they identify among this community. So much so that community members who have not found themselves often don't even know that they exist. In an interview with one of my peers, Lily, she argues that she did not know she existed. Her identities, she had no idea were out there because they didn't exist in the televised content that she was seeing, she was hearing about in the media that was around her. when people cannot see themselves, they cannot find comfort in who they are. If they cannot find who they are, then they cannot find comfort in themselves. And lack of comfort in themselves changes their entire life. Because television often prioritizes a cisnormative and a heteronormative identity, cisnormativity defined as the assumption that everyone around you is cisgender, and heteronormativity defined as the assumption that everyone around you is heterosexual or attracted to the opposite sex. Because they often perpetuate these two things, you rarely ever see something else. You rarely see what is outside. Only 4.6 of all recurring television characters in our media are LGBT figures. People often try to diminish this minuscule number and say that that's enough because LGBT people are only a small 4-5% of our population. But the way they find these is through surveys sent to adults, age 18 plus, often for legal reasons. Because of that, you do not have a full representation. There, although marginally, are more people finding themselves today as society does progress, just not enough. Because you don't have these numbers, these people, you don't have an active percentage. There are people out there who are not open, who are not out because they are afraid of backlash. I argue that you do not have the correct number, and therefore you cannot argue that this is an accurate reflection of people in the media. The small number that we do have does not explore all LGBTQIA identities. It does not represent asexual characters, aromantic characters, agender characters. There are very few transgender characters. And what we do have is majorly made up by the gay white man. I know all throughout history we hear about the straight white man getting everything, the one who controls everything. And now we're just following the same trope with the white man, barely skating by, barely giving enough into the exploration of LGBT people. Beyond that, we need people who are not just white. We need more Hispanic, more Asian representation in all of this. A more well-rounded representation of people in general. Media does not only influence those finding themselves, but those around them as well. When you perpetuate one idea, one story of what everything is, and you do not include the representation of other people, other figures, people around those individuals are uneducated. They don't know about these things. They develop biases and stereotypes because of what we are given. Some people don't have education of these things in their schools or at home because of different laws or the way that their town or local community works. Oftentimes, television is the breakthrough, the thing that allows people to connect to the outside world. When we see just one story, just one idea, and we don't give the proper education, the proper recognition of people and who they are, you are giving way to people not understanding, developing a hate, a bias, an ignorance against other people. And with media having such a strong influence as it does, I encourage, I implore that they use that power for good. We need to create a society that leads to both physical and mental safety for all people. We need a safer, more equal television content that everyone feels good watching. There are numerous possible causes of harm from the way that you're doing things now. Possible causes of harm that can and should be prevented. Television should be about enjoying the story, enjoying a riveting plot line, not about the various bedroom acts. It should be about people, about our story. It needs more well-rounded characters. People who are not just their sexuality. People who are there and present. We need to create a better, more comfortable viewing experience for everybody. And in this, we can move forward where we need to be as a society. A more accepting, less targeting, less threatening society. Because when you encourage over-sexualization, people are going to follow suit. But if you encourage representation and exploration of people, people will follow suit. We need to be there. That is where our society needs to move. The acceptance of people, where we can all feel safe. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Hannah Robertson to the stage, who will be speaking about American Sign Language in everyday life. Hannah advocates for a new culture that decreases the boundary between the verbal and nonverbal communities by increasing American Sign Language into educational environments.
In the words of Ken Glickman, signs are to eyes what words are to ears. American Sign Language, also known as ASL, is a visual language that involves arm and hand movements that combine with facial expressions to communicate. This language is primarily used by deaf and hard of hearing people, but with this, there's a stigma that being deaf is a deficiency or you can't be productive in society without speaking or listening. Sarah Novick states that more than 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. And many of these parents have first thoughts of, how will my child be able to communicate, or my child won't be able to fit in. There's a disconnect between the cultures, and as well as a lack of understanding for the nonverbal communities. Using ASL is viewed as a crutch, and it should be. It's a valuable language for everyone that takes the time to learn it. And the benefits that can be seen when using it, especially with young kids in the education environment, is much more important than the negative light that ASL is put into. So with the introduction of ASL, especially at younger ages in the education environment, it will decrease the boundary between verbal and nonverbal, creating deaf awareness along with a new culture. We all know that in society there's an obvious boundary between those that are verbal and those that are nonverbal. Whether we mean to or not, there is one. There's a stereotype that nonverbal people can't communicate when it's simply just a different way of communicating. Most verbal people don't have an understanding or awareness of the culture of the deaf or hearing impaired. So the main goal is to introduce ASL to young kids. The boundary would already see an improvement because the kids have an awareness of the culture that they are a part of. Virginia Haslinga and Erica Nevingloski also state that Morrison examined the energizing and influential aspects of effective use of gestures. Caring about others, persuasion, motivation, and even one's credibility can increase the effective use of gestures and expressions. Effective in this sense means that the language is learned in a positive and reinforcing way so that students can develop a correct relationship with the language and the users of the language. To encourage positivity when learning ASL, more focus needs to be on the effectiveness rather than on setting trends. A common trend that we're all aware of is baby sign language. We all know that it's the use of simple signs to communicate. So a parent could use the signs for milk or for more. And as Rachel Kolb says, who is deaf, she references the trend saying that it isolates the signs from the rich ASL environment that they are a part of. as well as it focuses on benefiting hearing parents and hearing children, which some of us may not even be aware of. It misses the opportunity to fully embrace the language with everyone. Even just now, I signed milk and more, and I excluded it from the true language. Rachel Cole is not taking away from the benefits. She's just simply saying that social media broadcasts this trend in the wrong way and for the wrong reasons. It chops up the language and creates a false image. The image that parents don't need to learn the full language to teach it to their child. They don't need to rely on the rich ASL environment. Rachel Cole just wants everyone to learn sign language, no matter the hearing or language status, and she wants everyone to view it as beneficial for those that actually take the time to learn it in the full capacity. Through studies done by Linda Acrodolo, Susan Goodwin, and Catherine Brown, they show that signing creates better verbal, social, and emotional skills, as well as helping to build stronger parent-child relationships, which is equally as important. Who wouldn't want to build a better relationship with their child? These relationships that are formed can be formed with student to student or student to teacher, and it should be considered when teaching ASL to young ages. In the early childhood setting, ASL is important. Learning how to be socially and emotionally available and to communicate effectively is very hard for young children. They have a hard time expressing themselves. They have stress of not fitting in, or being accepted, or understanding what's expected. We've all heard stories about that child that takes their anger out on their teacher, throws chairs, and doesn't know how to express themselves. With sign language, the physical movements with the verbal and visual cues helps maintain focus, so that child can now use ASL as another form to express how they're feeling. And it's sometimes viewed as an unconventional way to communicate, but unconventional is sometimes just what a child needs. It's also important that the environment that is created is fun, positive, and engaging for all students. And it starts with how the teachers view the language. In a thesis paper by Ellen Donahue, she explains a study that was conducted to find the opinions of professionals who work with young developing hearing children. With one speech pathologist, she explains with certainty she has seen the benefits of ASL, where she states that it provided the initial vehicle for communication, it significantly reduced the frustration and facilitated development. And she had experienced this firsthand. If all teachers viewed ASL like the speech-language pathologist, there wouldn't be an issue of needing to fix how the language is viewed. The language would already be seen in a positive light because most of the opinions come from teachers. In classrooms, with students from different backgrounds and different learning styles, some teachers can struggle to include or reach all of their students. Some students have more of a visual learning style or more of a presentation learning style. Not my favorite, but some people have those. They need to be creating a multimodal experience, which is different ways to communicate. Each modality or mode is a different way of communicating. So for example, speaking, gestures, writing, tweeting, texting, emailing, whatever you can think of. The teacher should be creating multimodal communication, which provides yet another opportunity for a student to express themselves. In the classroom setting, the teacher should be providing the lessons in ways that reach all the students, including the use of ASL. So the child should be able to see connections to what they're seeing, to what they're hearing, or to what they're seeing, to what they're writing. In classrooms that are diverse with these different learning styles and modalities, it will not only make a learning environment richer, but it also allows the students to have improved ways of thinking. So if a student has an improved ways of thinking, they can be more productive in society. And it improves the viewpoint of the school system. Even with all the benefits, the use of ASL, even with all the benefits of using ASL in the classroom setting, Communicating with sign language, just like any other language, has its difficulties. In social settings, when sign language has been taught is finally put to use, it can be difficult for the ASL learner to keep up. In an article by Jamie Burke, she explains that with sign language, you generally don't have the ability to immerse yourself in the language outside of the classroom. And in many cases, your interaction may be limited to a single family member who is deaf. Another challenge that Burke explains is that the learner needs to stop thinking straight English and rely on abstraction. While this would be a challenge if you were trying to teach a high school student who didn't want to take the class because all they needed to do was to take it for a graduation requirement, then they probably would not know how to think without straight English. But if you introduced it at young ages, the connection that the child has with the language would be more seamless. They wouldn't know anything different about relying on abstraction. The feeling of not keeping up is also an issue. But it's the same with a nonverbal person in a spoken conversation. That nonverbal person puts in more effort to participate in the verbal conversation, so why can't a verbal person put more effort in to participate in a nonverbal conversation? If more effort was put in by everybody, these challenges may not be so hard to overcome. In particular, the steps that need to be taken to incorporate ASL into the learning environments are as follows. The first being to change the viewpoint of ASL. It needs to go from a more negative light to a more positive light, and it's as simple as that. Then you need to get support from the different communities. You need to get support from the nonverbal communities, the deaf communities, the hearing impaired communities, the verbal communities, and most importantly, the school communities. Because without the support of the school communities, you cannot incorporate these curriculums into classrooms. Then you need to create curriculums that are effective in teaching ASL. This means that the language is learned in a positive and reinforcing way, and this allows the student to develop the correct relationship with the language and the users of the language. And then you need to simply start incorporating those curriculums into the school days, especially with younger students. If these few steps were taken to incorporate sign language into the daily school settings, the benefits would significantly outweigh the disadvantages. One might find themselves with an increased sense of community and culture. One can find themselves more enthusiastic about learning the language and the benefits of the language. A teacher might see development in a student socially or emotionally because they now have a different way to communicate, and that communication style works best for them. It will reduce frustration between all speakers because it allows everyone to speak on one platform. With ASL incorporated into everyday life, it will allow students to develop at their own pace with their own learning techniques, but most importantly, they will develop an appreciation for the community and the culture that they are a part of. So starting to teach young children now will be the first opportunity to improve learning, development, and the relationships that are formed in the future. Thank you.
Lastly, I would like to invite Martha Weinstein to the stage, who will be speaking about manufacturing chemicals. Martha works with manufacturers' responsibilities in releasing chemicals into the environment through their products and what steps are necessary to prevent and protect employees, the environment, and society.
Exposure to dangerous chemicals is bad. We all know that. That's why we have warning labels like keep away from eyes, keep away from children, do not ingest, and other labels cautioning the consumers about the chemicals that they are being exposed to. But what about products that don't tell you what chemicals they contain? That can be severely dangerous. Yes, not all chemicals and some chemicals are necessary for the manufacturing process. However, not informing people about these possible dangers can lead to severe consequences. The manufacturing industry has been negatively impacting not only the environment, but also the people involved in these industries for years. This is a big deal because the United States Environmental Protection Agency states that the effects of these chemicals can last for decades, even after this chemical is no longer being released. Very specific. Three chemicals in particular that are especially problematic are dioxin, polyfluoroalkyl, and bisphenol A. These chemicals are each very toxic and have horrible side effects. They can lead to all sorts of different diseases and disorders, and they each contribute to pollution. Dioxin, for example, is extremely dangerous because it can be found in many products used today. For example, you can find dioxin in plastic water bottles, plastic food packaging, tooth bonding, resin, feminine products, and clay. The manufacturing process also releases dioxin into the air and water. According to a study done by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, dioxin has been found in clay walls in chicken meat, and later in the chickens that consume it. People and chickens alike were exposed to dioxin through inhalation, ingestion, and dermal exposure. Inhalation occurred through the studio air where the clay was in use. Ingestion took place first in the food for chickens, where the clay was used in the chicken feed to prevent clumping. The chickens, while ingesting the food, also ingested the clay, which infected them with dioxin. Once they were infected with dioxin and later sold on the market, they were consumed by humans. When these humans ate chicken, they were also infected with dioxin. This is extremely dangerous because the exposure from clay to animals being consumed by humans is harder to detect since dioxin does not appear on any food label that may come with the chicken. Furthermore, the clay from the clay balls that was used in the chicken meal was also used in molding clay, so dioxin was not only being ingested, but artists were also generally exposed to it through the clay they used their bare hands to mold. The United States Environmental Protection Agency explained that even though the levels of dioxin have decreased in the past 30 years, they break down extremely slowly and are very persistent compounds. Future exposures, decades from now, will be the result of dioxin we release today during manufacturing. My next chemical is called polyphoto substances, also known as PFAS. They're severely dangerous because not only do they pose a serious danger through the manufacturing process, but also through consumption. PFAS are generally used in resins and plastics. One example of exposure to PFAS is with Bacon and America's Alabama facilities. They use PFAS in their food packaging specifically for burger workers. This is dangerous because the chemicals in the packaging can seep into the contents inside. This also means that the chemicals can leak into and contaminate the water. Safer Chemicals Healthy Families stated that members of their community have been drinking poisoned water for decades because of plants like the local Native American facilities. People who drink this contaminated water have later ended up with many different health problems that they believe to be the cause of PFAS. The Guardian wrote an article about PFAS explaining that even though Native American facilities have known about these risks for 20 years, they continue to mass produce these chemicals. In 1 year, they released so many chemicals that it was equivalent to releasing 1 billion pounds of carbon dioxide. So you can see how that would be negatively impacting the environment and contributing to climate change. My next chemical is bisphenol A. Bisphenol A is more commonly referred to as BPA. It is a chemical that has been used in making industrial plastic and resin since the 1960s. BPA is used in many things, one of the most dangerous being plastic containers such as water bottles and food packaging. BPA in plastics is severely dangerous because when the plastic heats up or freezes, it leaks chemicals into the contents inside, contaminating the water or food. Poland Springs water bottles had a very dangerous incident with BPA chemicals. This happened because the resin used to make the Poland Spring bottle contained BPA, and when the bottles were left in the car, sun, or freezer, they were leaking chemicals into the water that would later be ingested. When BPA chemicals are ingested, it puts that person at high risk for many different types of diseases and disorders. According to Richard's lab at University of Richmond, people exposed to higher levels of BPA are more likely to develop cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, and metabolic disorders. These diseases also affect the environmental inhabitants, including animals, organisms, and plants. The risk of exposure to these chemicals in the manufacturing process is not as prevalent as other chemicals that pollute the atmosphere. However, exposure to the smoke from the manufacturing facility does occur. Now that you know about the dangerous chemicals being used daily, I want to talk about a solution to this problem. One way to reduce the risk of exposures to dangerous chemicals and substances is to eliminate them completely. However, that isn't realistic, because some chemicals are necessary in the manufacturing process, and some chemicals don't pose huge risks. One realistic solution is to submit the chemicals that manufacturing companies use to the Toxic Release Inventory, also known as TRIE. TRIE records data and makes dangerous toxins in our products and environment part of the public domain. This is extraordinarily important because it is a start to ensuring that toxins stay at a safer level due to public pressure and awareness. These chemicals are reported by amount to try to maintain safety and for general information purposes. If these chemicals are found to be persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic, they are labeled as chemicals of special concern. This means that they are recognized as dangerous, and the public is made aware of just how dangerous they are. TRIE also publicizes the amount of specific chemicals that are released into the air, water, and earth. It would be very helpful to publicize these chemicals that manufacturing companies are using. This is because making publicizing these chemicals enforces that companies inform their customers and consumers about the chemicals that could be affecting them. Growing TRIE to include more chemicals and having further outreach could help buyers see that these products are dangerous. And in response, these manufacturing companies could start using more environmentally friendly chemicals rather than the damaging ones. On top of that, if manufacturing companies start losing money because their chemicals are dangerous, it might encourage them to use safer chemicals and fewer of them. Maintaining a good company image is not as important as the safety of people you are selling your product to. It would be better for manufacturers to be honest about the dangers they pose than to sweep them under the rug. A change needs to be made. Manufacturing companies cannot continue to pollute the environment and poison their workers. If we let this unbridled use of toxins continue, then the effect of the environment on the environment and its inhabitants will be catastrophic. This is because of the drastic dangers such as animal infection, water contamination, and air pollution. Workers and consumers are exposed to different chemicals without even knowing of their ingestion or exposure, which is not only dangerous but unjust. Manufacturing companies need to take responsibility for these exposures and make the chemicals they use public knowledge. In conclusion, there are many chemicals that are unsafe for the environment and its inhabitants, along with the workers exposed to them. Dioxin, PFAS, and BPA are some of the most prevalent chemicals being used in manufacturing today. With the help of Toxic Release Inventory, manufacturers will start releasing data to the public about chemicals they use, regardless of their danger level, to keep everyone involved with the company safe and aware. Informing everyone about dangerous chemicals is extremely necessary for the safety not only of people but our environment and wildlife. Holding manufacturers responsible for the chemicals used to make their products should be a source of pride for companies, not an abuse of public trust, a lawsuit, or an unfortunate legacy.
So that will conclude the student speaking portion of the evening. Big round of applause for them. Imagine reading all those essays. We'll take a brief intermission where you'll be able to congratulate the speakers and enjoy some of the refreshments that our SCI dining services have provided while the judges are deliberating. Following that, we will have the awards ceremony. would make your way back to your seats, we will begin the recognition ceremony.
Thank you for everybody for being such a wonderful audience tonight and supporting our students through the end of the Manson Essay process. I know that they are probably as excited as Mr. Brownell, Mr. Bies, and myself are to be through the Manson Essay process. But certainly, it's one of the oldest traditions here at MCI, and we're glad to continue that tradition in the humanities department. So, before we announce our two Manson essayists, we'd like to give each of our speakers a little medallion to recognize the night. So, I'm supposed to do that. I'd like to thank the MCI Maintenance and Dining Services for event setup and our snacks. Our judges are getting flowers. Aaron Fitz, Jessica Lee, and Deborah Susi. I would thank the speaking coaches by virtue of talking about the Manson Essay process is nearly complete, and that is myself, Mr. Brownell, and Mr. Bies. Our videographers who are live streaming for us tonight, Grace Cooley and Mara Walker, and flowers provided by the Flower Studios. Thank you, Susan. And now I'll call you up one at a time. Mr. Bies will give you your medallion. So first, let's go Clark Manawamsa. Next, Kyle Hall. Hannah Robinson. Riley Nelson. Alyssa Ardrey. And Martha Weinstein. And now for our Manson essayists. First, we'll do the Manson Essayist runner-up. The scoring explanation is in your programs. The Manson Essayist runner-up for 2022 is Clark Manawamsa. And your Manson Essayist for 2022, Hannah Robinson. again for everybody for coming out this evening. I hope you had an enjoyable evening. Please take some cookies with you for the road. Have a great night.
And